What's the most horrible thing you've done? Story 1. All right, this thread has gotten pretty long, but I need to tell the world about this. My cousin and I used to vacation with one another's family. One year, as a teenager, he met this girl and connected with her on the beach. Most people would understand. Vacation romances stop when you leave the beach. She did not. She continued to call and email and instant message him 15 times a day. She confessed her love to him and was planning on moving to Pittsburgh just to be with him. Obviously, this would not be cool with his girlfriend at home. Anyway, a couple of weeks after we came back from vacation, he and I devised this plan to get her to stop calling and emailing him. I called her up one night and told her that he was taken to the hospital with a football injury. A blood clot that formed while he was in surgery went to his head, and he died on the operating table. I may or may not have left this on her answering machine. The next day after my cousin left for school, his mom got a call from this girl's mother expressing her deepest sympathy for the loss of her son. Holy crap, did my aunt lose her mind. She thought something had happened when he was driving to school or something like that. She called my mom, and they had a huge screaming match with my cousin and me. In the end, I had to call and apologize to this girl and her mother and explain that what we did was wrong, and so on. So that night, I sat down to call her in front of my mother so she could verify I actually did it. I dialed my own phone number, which obviously went right into my voicemail. I carried on a 10-minute half conversation with my voicemail, crying, apologizing profusely, making my mom cry in the process. And that was that. He and I never heard from her again. He and I talk about it every now and then, between ourselves, but nobody else ever knew about it. Story 2, I had this 4 months pregnant teacher when I was in the 2nd grade. As a kid, I was really active and liked to run around the room during break. One day the bell rang and we needed to sit our backsides down on our chairs. Me and 2 of my buddies kept running around and playing. Suddenly, my teacher popped out in front of me and I bumped her belly really hard. She said that it really hurt and she needed to talk to my parents. 2 days after that incident, my teacher called in sick and we got a substitute teacher. A week after that, my mom told me that my teacher had a miscarriage. I have never seen that teacher again. I never really know if I did it or not. But in my young mind, it is my fault and it will forever scar me. Story 3. I do not know if it was the worst, but it is up there. When I was in high school, I put a firecracker in a friend's toilet. I do not know why. I thought it would be funny. When it went off, it cracked the toilet in a few places and it started to leak a little. My friend, who was a bigger guy, came to see what the noise was, and I explained to him that it was the toilet seat dropping. He told me to get out because he needed to use the bathroom, and I figured it was a great chance to have a great prank play out and to get out of trouble. After about 10 seconds, I heard a noise from the bathroom, like plates hitting a floor but not breaking, and then an agonizing howl. The scream scared me, and after a few minutes, he came out of the bathroom in his boxers with blood all over the place. It turns out that he sat on the toilet and it broke, cutting him up pretty badly. I never told him what happened, and he blamed his weight for it, which gave him a complex for the rest of school. I still feel bad about it. Story 4, back in my teens. So I had an ex once who was bullied horribly by another girl. I wanted to impress her, so with her help, I accessed her bully's computer and email, as it was easier in those days. I learned some things about her and created a fake perfect boyfriend for her on a dating site she had signed up to. She only spoke to this guy through email, and she fell in love with him, which we knew from accessing her email. Then, on my girlfriend's birthday, I had this guy stand the girl up harshly in a club in front of us while she watched my girlfriend have a great time. This is pretty awful. I regret it, and I cannot blame my ex for talking me into it. What I do blame my ex for is lying. I found out later that my ex was the original bully all along. Story 5. Back during the tail end of my high school years, I was friends with a guy who was basically the laughingstock of the school. He was morbidly obese, incredibly nerdy, and totally a pompous person. But when you got to know him, he really was not a bad guy. We used to play Magic the Gathering and World of Warcraft together all the time. I felt like trolling him, so I recruited a friend of mine from the next town over into our guild. Her name was Wendy. In short, I downloaded voice-changing software and pretended to be this girl, and basically made him fall in love, to the point where he wanted to move into an apartment with her after senior year. I had a mocked-up MySpace with pictures of a random, average but good-looking girl, and added a bunch of people from our school and from the school she was supposedly going to. He was obsessively in love with this girl. One day I just dropped it. I made all traces of her disappear. He asked me about her for months, but I said that I had not heard from her either, and that I was worried. I crushed him. He was ready to give up everything for this girl. I helped him get over her, though, and got him connected with his current girlfriend. But man, in retrospect, I have no idea why I took it so far. The fact that I probably harmed this guy, who I was friends with for a long time, it is scary to think that a person could do that. Story 6. During a game of minnows and whales at a public pool, I pretended to drown. I was being brought to the surface, which is part of the game, and decided to let my body go limp. I lay face down for a few seconds on the surface before someone dragged me out. They laid me beside the pool and began panicking. I just lay there with my eyes closed and breathing as slow and deep as I possibly could. Everyone around me was convinced I had stopped breathing. An ambulance was called to the scene and arrived with siren blaring and lights flashing. The paramedics did not know what to make of it as I began sporadically panting and then holding my breath again. They decided to rush me to the hospital. It took the doctor about 30 seconds to realize I was pretending. I heard my mom arrive and heard the doctor say to her, "He is just lying there with his eyes closed. Take him home." She came and got me, and we went home. I then proceeded to bury that memory as deep as I could. Sorry, world. Story 7. A couple of summers ago, I got into the 9-to-5 routine, doing an internship at a big insurance company. Driving to work one day, this one guy was really upsetting me, speeding at the worst times, cutting through traffic, making bad lane changes, and I ended up catching up to him at the next red light, in the lane next to him and a few cars ahead. So me being a jerk, I decided I was not going to let him change lanes this time and boxed him in when he tried next. I ended up doing this for a few kilometers. It turns out that when we hit the next traffic light, he pulled into the emergency animal hospital, did not even park his car in a parking spot, picked his dog up out of the back seat and ran inside. The worst part was, my window was open, so I heard the dog wailing and screaming in pain all the way inside. It scarred me forever. Story 8. As kids, my sisters would always make fun of my brother, who was a little bit overweight as a child. He always turned to me for encouragement, as I never picked on him. One day when I was visiting them, my sisters said something so impulsively funny that I just laughed without thinking. My little brother was standing in the doorway to go outside and heard the comment about him and saw me laughing at it. I will never forgive myself for it. The other is when I shrugged off my grandmother's present, which was a collector's doll when I was 11 or so. I learned years later that she had saved for months for that doll, as she was quite poor. She died later that year, alone, when my family was on vacation. It took 2 weeks for people to find her body. I will also never forgive myself for not showing my love for her. Story 9. This is not the worst thing I have done, but up to this day I remember it and feel bad. When I was in my early teens, my mom and I never got along. We constantly fought, and I was always grounded. So once she grounded me, and I waited until she left the house and sneaked into her room. I grabbed her favorite music compact disc. It was her only compact disc, and I scratched it all over with my nails and some keys. Then I left it back in its place and retreated like a ninja. Months later on a road trip, we were playing some music in the car, and my mom put the compact disc in, and it sounded awful. Not even 10 seconds of normal music. She then said, "Oh, looks like my compact disc is not working anymore." I really liked it. I felt so bad that day. Story 10. The worst thing I have ever done was tell my mom I never loved her. I did and still do love her, but she said something extremely hurtful to me, and that was the most hurtful thing I could think to say back to her at that point. It worked. She burst into tears and ran out of the room, and then I ran out of my house and went to a friend's house for 2 days without telling anyone where I was. I just did not want to talk to her. I talked to my dad, but my mom and I did not say a word to each other for a couple of days even after I came home. Every time I think about it, I realize I should have just said how I felt about what she said, and not that. I cannot get the look of her face scrunching up and the tears forming out of my head. It hurts to think about. Story 11. Okay, so here is a pretty messed up story. The summer after my freshman year in high school, I went on a school-sanctioned trip to Chile and Peru. There were about 15 of us, including a bunch of my friends, so it was a good time. Near the end of the trip, we were staying in a small hotel in Cusco, Peru, which is at an elevation of about 11,000 feet. We had no plans for the rest of the night after unpacking, so everybody was just messing around and having a good time unwinding. I was staying in a hotel room with two of my friends. Now, I will elaborate if anyone wants me to, but after a particularly hilarious series of events, two of the girls on our trip ended up locked in our bathroom. It was funny at first, but I was feeling a little sick from the altitude, and I kind of felt like I needed to use the bathroom. Since I could not go into our bathroom, I went downstairs to the girls' room to use their bathroom. When I walked into the room, one of the hotel staff was still tidying up, since we had not been there very long yet, and some of the rooms were not quite ready when we arrived. I smiled at him and walked into the bathroom. When I lifted the toilet seat, the water level seemed a little bit low. I was suspicious for a second, but then thought, I am in Peru. Their toilets probably function differently than American toilets, so this must be normal. Well, I finished taking a huge dump and flushed the toilet. The water level started to rise, and I was mortified when I realized it was not going to stop. It turns out the toilet actually was clogged. So all of this brown water was flowing out of the toilet and onto the floor. I remember distinctly that my first thought was, holy crap. I started to freak out, looking around frantically for anything that might help the situation, but there were not any towels. This all happened so quickly that I was kind of in a daze and was not thinking straight. Fueled mostly by adrenaline, I casually walked out of the bathroom while trying to keep a straight face. The man was still finishing up with the room. I carefully closed the door behind me and left as quickly as possible. I should have said something to him, but I just could not do it. From the guy's point of view, he was just doing his job when I casually walked into the bathroom, made a ridiculous mess, and left without saying a word. I cannot even imagine what the poor guy's reaction must have been when he went to put more towels in the bathroom and found the floor completely covered in water. I made my way back upstairs to my room and did not say a word about it to anybody. Story 12. Being young and naive, I forgot to log off my email account. This was back in the days before web browser mail, so we usually used Telnet to log in and check our mail. But I digress. One day I was sitting waiting for class to start, human zoology of all classes, when my professor called out my name and asked to speak with me. We went outside and she told me that she got that picture I sent her. I was like, what picture? I do not remember sending you any picture. She explained that she got an email with a picture of some man's private part with the line, here's my private part for everyone to see. I dismissed it and told her that I had no idea what was going on, which was true. She was not mad at me or anything, just a little confused. Later that day, I got a call from the student judiciary office telling me that I had to come in. It turned out that it was not my professor who had received it, but all faculty and staff and students had received it as well. They only took my email away from me, as I think they believed me when I told them I had nothing to do with it. Here is the worst part. A couple of years later, I needed that account for a project and got it reinstated. When I went and checked my mail, amongst the hundreds of messages left in there was a copy of the original email with the picture of some man with a tiny private part. I mean, I do not have the biggest private part, but yeah, it was a little embarrassing. Luckily for me, most students back then did not have email accounts from the school. Mainly the electrical and computer science technology students, so I do not think many ladies got that email. Bullet dodge. Story 13. I am a former hero addict. I have 69 days clean off the substance today. Well, you asked for the most horrible thing I have done, and that is a pretty tough one, but I think I have the answer that should unsettle enough of you to get some upvotes. My mother used to pay me cash to pick up my 25-year-old autistic brother from special education classes. Because it is pretty far away and she does not know how to drive on the highway because it scares her. Well, it turns out that his school borders a town called Paterson, New Jersey, which is like the hero capital of New Jersey, and happens to be where I used to buy. So I picked up my brother from daycare and was craving because at that point I had not used anything in over a day. Cold sweats oozed from every pore of my body. A cold chill shattered my spine. But this was nothing new to me. I was a garbage head, a user, a lowlife. I did not think twice. I brought my brother into Patterson and went down the block as if I were alone, not even realizing I was now risking two lives, not just my own. Any trip down to that block is risking your life. If you are not getting robbed by the dealers, you are risking getting stopped by the police. Especially me, driving down there as a young white privileged nerd in his Honda Fit. Anyway, I bought with my autistic brother in the car, and he did not understand any of it. He has very severe autism and is unable to communicate. I am still sorry to this very day for what I did that day, risking both of our lives like that. Risking my life is nothing new, but I am not used to risking others. Anyway, that is my confession for you. You probably were not expecting anything serious, but that is one of my darkest secrets. Thanks for reading. Story 14. I was a counselor at a sleepaway camp, and I put on this full-body green spandex suit so I could run around and maybe make some of the kids laugh. I went to a hockey game that some of my campers were playing in, and while I was there, somehow this sweet little kid found out that it was me in the green suit. He tried to pull my shorts off. Those things are tight and too revealing, believe me. And I played back with him and somehow accidentally struck him in the stomach really hard. He was crying really loudly in front of everybody. They even stopped the game to see what was going on. I picked him up and carried him back to the bunk, all while in the green suit. I paid him $30 to not tell anybody about it because I was so afraid of getting fired. Good thing I was covered head to toe, or people would have realized that it was me and I might have been fired. Story 15. Way late to the party, but this always makes me feel sad. When I was probably 7 to 9, my brother 5 to 7, my mom would buy us the kids' cuisine sometimes for dinner. We always got super excited and thought it to be a special occasion. Well, one evening, for whatever reason, the specific pasta of the day was not up to my standards. I made a big deal about this and would not eat it, and kept complaining about how poor of a choice this particular meal was. My mom started sobbing and had to leave the table. My dad just looked at me like he was thinking, what kind of child have I created? The twist. My mom has multiple sclerosis, and she probably served us those dinners because she did not have enough energy to cook dinner that night. I still feel awful every time I reflect on that. Story 16. When I was about 16, my friends and I were out getting high and decided that it would be a great idea to put a can of sardines in someone's car. They would hop in their car and the smell would hit them. Hilarious. So we drove around a while until we found this car parked in a little block of offices. I got out and checked the door, and it was unlocked. So I opened the can of sardines and sent oily fish and tomato sauce all over the back seat of the car. As I was running back to my friend's car, I looked up into the office that still had its lights on. Inside was a woman in her mid-30s, early 40s, vacuuming this law office at 1:30 in the morning. This poor woman is a night cleaner, just working hard, and now has to deal with what I just did. I still feel terrible to this day and cannot believe I could have done that to someone. Story 17. When I was in middle school, but the America Online Instant Messenger conversations continued and got more and more disturbing. She told me her parents beat her, but later admitted her father had only slapped her once. Her weight became an obsession, convinced she was unattractive to my friend because she was overweight. She was not. She contemplated bulimia. Finally, one night, she started an America Online Instant Messenger conversation with me. I responded, "Hey, fatty," and she never bothered me again. Now she is a stripper, no joke. Story 18. I realized when I was young that I had an interest in girls. Then once junior high hit, so 13 years old, I ended up coming out to my best friend. She never told me she was interested in girls, but she was curious. So we spent the whole summer together as girlfriends, but wanted to keep it a secret. We still thought it was wrong. Either way, once school started, she continued to want to date openly, kissing me, holding hands, writing love letters, and so on. But I was so scared someone would find out. So I ignored her. I ignored her for the first half of the school year, did not talk about it, did not look her in the eye, nothing. Then one day she came up to me in class crying with a letter saying things like, "I miss you. I have never been happier in my life than when I was with you. Please be mine again," and so on. And I looked her in the eye and ripped it up in front of her. She completely broke down in front of the class, and I would not explain why. Of course, whenever someone asked about it, I would say she was a liar, and it never happened. We are still Facebook friends, but we do not really talk, and she is kind of reckless now. Story 19. When my son was 18 months old, I was out grocery shopping with him. I put him in his car seat and was about to buckle it when my shopping cart started rolling away from the car. I ran and grabbed it and then put my groceries in the trunk. I forgot completely about buckling my son. On the way home, I was about to make a right turn into my bank. I heard my son fiddling with the door handle. Some part of my mind knew this was strange, as he should not be able to reach it, but I ignored it. As we made the turn, my son opened the door and flew out of the car. I am not a slow driver, so we were moving pretty fast. I slammed on the brakes and raced out of the car. A large pickup truck was behind me, and they slammed on their brakes too. They stopped only a few inches away from my son, who was sitting upright on the ground screaming. I picked him up, and he appeared to be unharmed. I rushed back to my car, buckled him in his seat, and drove off since traffic was backing up, and I did not want someone to call the cops on me. I drove around the corner and parked in an empty lot. I took my son out, and he was totally fine. He started walking around and smiling. Somehow, he did not have a single scratch or bruise. I never told my wife what happened, and I never intend to. Story 20. At some point when I was young, my older sister asked me to get her a drink, soda of some sort, from the outside fridge. I did not want to, but was essentially forced to after getting in a fight with her and my parents telling me I would get it for her. I went out and poured her half a drink and then antifreeze in the other half. I stared at my concoction for at least a minute before shaking it off and dumping it out behind the house. Still do not grow grass right there. I still poured her another drink, but in the same cup, so I could feel evil without anything bad happening. I also melted her Barbie dolls' heads, and I tried to destroy her friendships. Later, I had S with a girl without a condom, almost got her pregnant, and treated her pretty carefully but non-emotionally until she got her period. Then I started talking to her much less. She broke down at some point and told me she wrote a poem about me. It was depressing. I emotionally manipulated my way out of her committing suicide or talking to me anymore. I am wary of girls that become too emotionally dependent on me. Really, I have a lot of awful things I have done within relationships. I had a small affair with an older girl while her boyfriend was in the army. They broke up, she got depressed, and exiled herself from everyone she knew. I hear she had a baby recently, not mine or his, but none of that is the worst thing I did. I had a great friend who got me into a lot of good things. He was an orphan, his mom died of alcohol poisoning, and his dad overdosed on heart meds. But he was still happy, just a little weird. He got into substances in middle school, really into substances. I stopped being friends with him, then I got into some substances around the time he got out of them. His grandpa died and he got kicked out of his grandma's house. He was living between hers and his great aunt's house anyway. He started running, lost a ton of weight. Pretty cool kid. Started dating senior year, actually. I was pretty happy for him. One day he called me up and said he had made a huge mistake. I naturally asked what happened. He told me he needed to show me. So I drove over to meet him over by the bridge. He was acting all jumpy. He had been crying. So he walked me over and looked down at the dirt, where I saw the most awful sight I had ever seen. It was his girlfriend's body. Well, I do not know if she was really dead at that point. I vomited, of course. It had blood all over it. Could not even recognize the face. He said they were just setting up some fireworks. Oh yeah, he loved fireworks, massive fireworks. And they went off in her face and he did not know what to do. I shook my head and drove off. Did not hear anything about it until later. Then the girl got a missing persons report filed. They found her near the shore of the lake in less than a week. His aunts were too old to realize he was gone. Well, I assume they only realized it when the truancy officer came to their house. I remember there was not a missing persons report, though. The police were just kind of quiet about the whole thing. Papers did not print anything. I think the public grief would have given those old ladies a heart attack. But neither me nor anyone I know ever heard from him again. Story 21. When in college, I got a summer internship at a local nonprofit. Good gig. Boss was a super cool hippie dude who lived way out of town on a large farm. Being a farmer, he had tolerance for the need for guns in a farm setting. Yes, in some instances, you actually do need a gun on a farm, meaning killing predator wolves to save cows or chickens and so on. We had a company 4th of July party, and everyone was extremely drunk, starting with the boss. The boss decided to get out some machine guns and let people shoot his pawn. No harm, no foul, other than totally drunk, untrained people handling machine guns. Being a redneck by ethnicity and culture myself, he gave zero concern to me playing with his machine gun. I decided to get more drunk and go Tony Montana on his pond. I woke up in the morning to realize I had gunned down a small family of beavers, which he had hand-raised and released back into the wild. Story 22, I was at a bar and got really drunk one night. I woke up the next morning and realized I had a girl's number, but had no recollection of what she looked like. I texted her for a while and we decided to hang out. When I picked her up, she stepped out of her house and smiled. It was the worst display of crooked teeth I had ever seen. Anyway, to be polite, I went through with the date. A couple of weeks later, I was catching up with some friends at lunch. A girl was sitting nearby who looked over at us and smiled. She also had a very unfortunate set of teeth, which my buddies had noted. I eventually told them the story of the girl I dated, and one of my friends asked me if she was attractive. I responded in my overly loud voice she would be attractive if her teeth were not so messed up. I immediately remembered the girl sitting near us and looked at her. She had the most horrified expression I have ever seen. I have never felt like a bigger jerk. Story 23. I was in love with this girl. We had known each other for years, but timing was never right for us to get together. Eventually, she found this guy who was just about to go into the army, and they were going to get married. I understood when she told me that I could not let that happen. I knew my life would never be right without her, so I hung out and made friends with the guy. This went on for about 9 months or so. I found out where he came from, about his troubled family, and how he had been a hero addict when he met her. He cleaned up his life and swore he was straight for the rest of his life. He really loved her and was going into the army to support the both of them. One night my time came. He and she had argued, and he was at my friend's house to blow off steam. We were hanging out, they were drinking, and I brought out my bottle of oxycodone, legitimate medical condition. I crushed up one of the pills and let my friend do a line. I took one, and I offered one to him. I knew he would take it because he was a junkie. Just like I was a junkie. He took it. It took a bit of coaxing. I rationalized it for him. I told him it was just once, just one pill, and he would fly one last time before he took off to boot camp. He had been clean for a long time. He could indulge once without going overboard. Eventually he cracked. He took one, then took one the next day on the way home. I gave him 2 more, and that was all it took. He fell off the wagon, started on hero again, got disqualified, and the girl dumped him. I was there for her to cry with, and we connected. We dated for a month, then we broke up. I do not know what happened to him. Story 24. This was in middle school before I learned basic human interaction, apparently. A few of us were talking in class, among them an old friend with whom I had been friends since about 2 years old. She was a cheerleader, one of the big strong girls at the bottom of the pyramid. You know, the real cheerleaders. We were joking about something, I do not remember what, and I asked if it had caused her to be kicked off the cheerleading team. This was game day, and she was wearing the uniform. She replied, "Ha, yeah, I got kicked off the team." All right, then inexplicably, full slow mode set in. I said something like, "Oh, was it because you guys were doing the pyramid and they dropped you, and you left a 2-foot indentation in the concrete?" Wow. Why did I say that? Cue the tears from her, the death glares from everyone else, and me just staring at my desk for 20 minutes. I do not know why I said it. She was always a friend. I felt so awful after. 13 years later, I still feel like a total jerk thinking of it. Story 25. When I was in elementary school, we would often play tag on the wooden play structures at recess that seemed to be at least a story high at the top with a metal slide and bar above that. I was pretty active, and there was a point when there was this one kid chasing me, and I ran up the play structure. I waited at the metal slide, and just as he was about to tag me, I jumped down onto the slide while holding the metal bar above it. I ended up doing a flip over it and landing painfully on my knees. When I looked around, the kid was gone, so I went on playing tag. Recess was stopped fairly soon after, and an ambulance appeared. Apparently, during my little leap, the kid had tried to jump at me and slipped off the structure, hitting his head on the metal slide and several of the wooden posts before landing on the pebble-paved ground. He transferred schools later, and I never saw him again. A few years later, while revisiting my elementary school, I learned that he had suffered major brain damage during the fall and was sent to a school for special needs. He ended up dying a few years later from an infection. Story 26, I have a couple of experiences. They are not all too bad, but sit in the back of my mind. When I was quite young, in junior school in England, a friend and I were messing about, stupid things you do when you are young. I bit his shoulder like a vampire. God knows why, though in my opinion not too hard. He was a bit of an easily bruised type, and maybe I bit too hard. Anyway, he ended up crying with a massive bite-shaped mark on his shoulder and ran off to a teacher. I got scolded so hard for that and felt quite bad about it. Probably not the worst. This I think is, though, again, quite young, junior school, we had a physical education lesson. This lesson was special because we had an American coming to teach us a little about American football. To the point, this guy was big and black. I am not racist, but at this time I had barely been exposed to any other race. He introduced himself to us as we were all standing in a line. His name was Jerry, I believe. For some reason, I decided to open my mouth and loudly shout out, "Can we call you Blackie?" It was one of those experiences where you realize as soon as you open your mouth that you have done something wrong. I still feel bad to this day. Story 27. Man, I feel like a jerk just thinking about it, but I also feel like telling a short story. This was before the days of MySpace and Facebook and whatever. Essentially, I started dating a girl halfway across the country that I met in some chat room. However, we only communicated via instant messaging. Anyway, she would show me her poetry on whatever primitive blog was around at the time and send me pictures of herself, and this went on for a month or two rather smoothly. However, I began to assume correctly that these pictures of her were actually of her friend, which I had seen thanks to a link on her blog. Not to be duped any longer by this lying girl, I plotted my escape the best way I knew how. I pretended to hurt myself. At least that is what my mom told her. I posed as my mom, if that is not clear. I told her I was going to live, but she would not be talking to me ever again because I gave myself amnesia or some nonsense. I blocked her screen name and went on with my days. And about 2 weeks later, she instant messaged me from a new screen name. "Oh my God, are you okay?" So now I went back to being my mom and had to tell her that I was still recovering and went into a tirade about how I left notes mentioning her and that it was all her fault. She apologized profusely, but I laid into her with all the hurtful things my 14-year-old brain could come up with. She called me a rude name and told me I did not understand true love, and I blocked her again. Another month went by and she instant messaged me from a new screen name again. This time I did not act like my mom, but instead I pretended to be a new me with no memory of the past or her. To make a long story short, this led to her trying to make me remember how much I loved her for the next few months. I dismissed her as a confused person and continually blocked her new screen names as she pleaded with me, "Baby, just try to remember us." Sometimes I would have breakthroughs only to relapse the next time I talked to her, and generally just amused myself, knowing I was hurting her little by little. Eventually, I had enough of playing cat and mouse with her and changed my screen name. I sometimes wonder what I could have done differently. That is, to bother her more. But I think I did enough damage. Story 28. When I was about 8 years old, I was a church-going Cub Scout. There was this little kid at church who felt like he could do anything because his big brother could beat me up. I finally got sick of it and told him I would kick his backside and his brother's backside too. The kid set it all up at church in this kind of atrium area. He let his big brother in, who was probably a good 2 or 3 years older and probably a head taller than me. I laid into him with a heavy punch and almost broke his nose. There was blood everywhere. It turned out the kid did not tell his brother what was going on, and he had no idea what was about to happen. The kid ran off to his parents, and when I explained what had happened, he got it worse than anyone. Story 29. I was always the calm and quiet kid, I always minded my own business, and really only spoke when spoken to. One day, though, my father and stepmother had gotten themselves into one of their heated arguments. They had been together for a good number of years at that point, but by that time I had grown accustomed to it. I nonchalantly turned on some music and waited for the storm to pass like I usually did. Part of me must have been subconsciously reveling in the fact that they were not getting along, since I always hated my stepmother because I distinctly heard my stepmother say some rather unflattering things about my biological mother. What followed was not pretty. I threw my door open and butted my way into their argument. Next thing I knew, I was spewing every possible obscenity and insult imaginable at this woman. I called her a degenerate person, an incompetent and inept mother, and a genuine waste of a human being, among other things. As a bit of an afterthought, I told her that her cooking also tasted like something you would scrape from a dog's backside. There was genuine shock in both of their eyes. Something about the calm and collected stepson erupting in a flurry of obscenities must have caught them off guard. All my stepmother could muster was a stuttered curse. My dad sort of pushed me away from the conversation and told me to stay inside my room. Afterwards, I could hear her raging to my dad that she could not believe his son called her a degenerate person. That all happened a few years back, but it certainly left a mark on me and my stepmother's relationship. We still do not get along, and giving each other a sideways glance is about as social as we are going to get. She must have also really taken my critique about her cooking to heart because apparently she does not do a whole lot of cooking for anyone anymore. Story 30. Slightly not based on the question, the time I felt the worst after making a stand about something was when I caught a woman choking and slapping her tiny chihuahua on the street, screaming at it to shut up and behave. I am not a fan of animal rights groups. I do not care much about animal experimentation and all that, but seeing someone yelling at some tiny animal just kind of set me off. So I turned and yelled at the lady to stop hitting her dog, that she was doing something wrong and needed to stop smacking a tiny defenseless creature in the face. Well, she ran right up to me and started giving me an earful about how it was none of my business, how she treated her pet. But then it got worse. Other people joined in telling me it was none of my business. I had some short guy come up and try laying down the questions, asking if I was an animal behavior specialist or a police officer, or if what was going on there was any of my business. I could not believe it. I was standing in the middle of a dozen people berating me for trying to protect something that had no voice and no ability to protect itself from some shouting lady, and I was the monster. I am still outraged to this day. Apparently in New Westminster, British Columbia, Canada, it is okay to hit your pet on the street because onlookers will just cover their eyes and pretend they see nothing. I guess that is why the region has so many homeless people and exploited youth too. Nice work, people. Story 31. When I was a teenager, I was hanging out in my best friend's room while he did something for his dad. Other friends were around the house. This friend had a very attractive girlfriend at the time, and I was very much the stereotypical, socially awkward, virginal nerd. My friend was not. I harbored a secret crush on this girl, but obviously kept it to myself. Best friend had one of those big bed frames with little storage compartments attached to the headboard, and the left one was open a bit. Out of idle curiosity, I opened the door all the way, and I saw a printout of a girl's naked torso on folded over paper. Of course, I picked them up and opened them, and then I saw her face. It was his girlfriend. The odd combination of the voyeur aspect of this situation and my attraction to this girl and the thrill from my adolescent mind of seeing her totally nude and posed in various interesting positions caused an explosive cocktail of lust so powerful, primal, and unfamiliar to me at the time that it still sort of gets me excited a little bit. Without really considering my actions, which is unusual for me, I folded the pictures back up and popped them in my pocket. I used said pictures for self-satisfaction repeatedly when I got home, and then realized what I had done. I instantly felt sick. I continued to feel sick for days. What I had done was invade the privacy of my best, most trusted friend, stolen from him, alienated the privacy and dignity of his girlfriend. She never found out. And to make it worse, he obviously noticed their absence. But he refused to accuse me. He accused everyone else, including his father. People told me he told them he knew it could not have been me. I burned the pictures. I was sick for over a week. I have never felt so guilty, so horrible, so low over anything else in my life. I have always had a powerful conscience, but this was the closest thing I have ever felt to torture due to my own actions. I never told him. I am too ashamed to tell him, even though I seriously doubt he would care very much by now. He is still my best friend. The guy is like my brother, but this whole event still bothers me a considerate amount when I am laying in bed considering all the mistakes I have ever made, as people often do, for whatever reason. Story 32, I was about to leave for military basic training. I was scared and trying to have sex with as many women as possible because I guess I did not think I would ever come back. Anyway, I started flirting with this one girl who had previously been just a friend of mine. She had a boyfriend, but it did not matter to me because I did not know him. After a few weeks of intensely flirting with her, she broke up with her boyfriend. It was the night before I left and I was saying goodbye to all my friends. I said goodbye to her and she went in for a kiss and I turned away, saying I did not want to start anything if I was going to be leaving the next day. Anyway, the worst part about this is apparently the other guy did not take the breakup too well. His life sort of turned into a downward spiral. I found out that about a year later, this guy killed himself. He put on a nice suit, walked out to the middle of an orchard, overdosed, and wrote a suicide note. I will never know for sure if I had acted differently if this guy would have still killed himself, or if his psychological problems ran deeper than just having a girlfriend and he would have killed himself anyway. To this day, I still feel that I killed this man. Story 33. I do not know how old I was, but I was old enough to know better. I was having some kind of fight with my mom. She sent me to bed early, and I went in the bathroom because I always took a shower before bed and locked the door. I then proceeded to pretend to fall in the shower and scream in pain, expecting her to panic or cry or something. God, I hate myself right now. She broke down the door and part of the wall to get to me, so I pretended to have slipped and fallen and forgotten that I locked the door in order to get out of more trouble. A few years later, I actually did fall in the shower. I just blacked out and woke up a while later with her carrying me to the hospital. I guess I was bleeding a lot. Karma. One time after another fight with my mom about homework, I drew a picture of her with a smoking gun in her hand while I was bleeding to death from a gunshot to the head. She had a speech bubble that said, "I do not care if you are dying. Do your homework." She kept it and showed it to me a few years back, and we laughed. I love you, Mom. I was a piece of shh as a kid. Story 34. My parents divorced when I was young. My dad remarried and he and my stepmom had 2 daughters, and I visited them during the summer. One of our many activities was playing outside with water guns, and since they lived there and were more permanent, one year they got super soakers. They were expensive at the time for water guns, and consequently I did not get one, since I was not living there, and my mom would need to get one for me. I had some little dinky water gun compared to them, and it was grossly unfair. I am a few years older than my oldest sister, and she is 3 years older than the next, and I was faster, a little more cunning, and a lot more boy. One advantage I had over them was that I have a penis and it is directable and able to focus urine. I had enough of the uneven sides with the water guns, and I was able to run and hide from them long enough to use this ability to my advantage and piss into my water gun. I filled the rest of it with water and proceeded to play with my new ammonia. It was much more enjoyable from that point on. They were pretty vocal about how they were winning, but I am pretty sure they were wrong. Story 35. At the age of 18 to 19, I was seeing this girl, Pam, a real cool girl who worked as a projectionist at an independent theater. She was really smart, had unusual taste in music, and was just all around fun and interesting. We got back to my apartment after a night of house parties and ended up on the couch watching television for about 5 minutes before we started the whole precursor to side time thing. Out of nowhere, while we were lip-locked, I suddenly tasted salt water in my mouth because she was crying. She told me not to worry and said she was just thinking about some past things, and I pressed gently until she finally came forward. She told me she had been raped by her father at a very young age, and that sometimes when she was drinking, it brought back those awful memories. We ended up talking for the rest of the night until we fell asleep on each other. The next day, she was awake before me. making breakfast and seeming super relieved she had gotten that part of her past out of the way. We ate breakfast. Then she cuddled up next to me on the couch and we started making out and getting touchy-feely, and I noticed I was not getting aroused at all, not even a little. She realized it after a while and asked if it was because of what she told me the night before, apologizing and saying it was not her fault and that he had made her. And I told her there was no way she should ever apologize for something that monster did to her, and that if he was not already dead, I would kill him. Never happened again between us, and it ended about 2 weeks later while we were naked in bed, and she was once again asking why, when I just blurted out that all I could think of her as now was a victim and that I wanted to feel sorry for her, not sleep with her. She ran out screaming and getting dressed on her way out the door as I apologized, but it was already too late. If there is a hell, I will see you there. Story 36. When I was around 14 years old, I was not well liked. I had friends, but I was not one of the popular kids. Every school has bullies, and one of them in particular had a thing for me. Let us call him Billy the Bully. I never understood what he hated so much, but he took out so much crap on me every single day. He would get into my locker, which was easy to pick with a paperclip, and steal my books, sabotage me when I tried talking to girls, and basically make my life miserable. He knew my family made decent money, and his family, while not poor, was not very rich. He had been known to steal from teachers, from the gym, from the nurse's room, but he was never caught. One day I had enough and spread a rumor that my mom had just sold some antiques left by my grandmother for a few $1,000s and that we had cash at home. I knew he would come to my house to try stealing it. I waited for weeks and he never came, until one day he finally did. I left the back patio door unlocked by mistake. I hid in my parents' room where he would think the money was, and when he opened the door, I confronted him with my dad's old revolver. I shot him 5 times in the chest and killed him. I called my parents first, then the police. I practiced my story every day while I waited for him, and I told the police that I heard an intruder, ran into my parents' room, grabbed the gun, and fired in fear for my life without recognizing him until afterward. I went through hell being questioned, and my parents had to put me in therapy. My school found out, people felt sympathy, and suddenly I had more friends wanting to hang out with me. They just wanted to be around the kid who had killed someone in self-defense, but I did not care. I was no longer bullied. Story 37. In 6th grade, everyone picked on one guy in our class. The big gag was to try to tie his book bag, the kind with elastic bands across the back, to his chair. Everyone tried jokingly for a long time, but no one ever managed it. One day, just as we were getting ready to leave, I succeeded in tying his bag to his chair, and when he got up, the chair came up with him and he fell to the floor. Our teacher made all of us hand in a paper and write who did it if we saw anything. Everyone told me they would not snitch on me, but I felt guilty and wrote, "It was me, bail bondsman." The next day, the teacher told me he wanted to see me after class, but I said I knew what I did was wrong, that I had apologized and that I felt terrible, and would accept any punishment he wanted to give. He never brought it up again, but I have felt horrible ever since. The next day, his mother even cut off all the elastic bands on his bag, which meant he had gone home, told her what happened, and she thought it was serious enough to do something about it. Story 38. When I was little, we had a crossing guard who was mentally handicapped. I never knew exactly what condition he had, but he had slurred speech, moved slowly, and was always kind. Being little kids, though, we were assholes. We would throw pine cones at him, laugh, and make fun of him. One day he finally had enough and reported me, and I got in trouble. My parents picked me up from school and took me home for suspension, and for the first time in my life, my dad literally beat my ass. I felt like a piece of garbage for how I treated that man, but I was also furious because I did not think my dad had the right to be that angry. I do not know why I thought what I did, but I decided that I would kill myself or force my dad to do it accidentally. I wrapped a bike chain around my neck in a way that it would tighten, attached it to the headboard of my bed, and threw a blanket over myself with my feet sticking out. My family had to leave the house that day, and when they kept calling me to come out and I never answered, my dad came to get me. He grabbed my feet and yanked hard, screaming at me, and each pull tightened the chain more. After several pulls, he ripped the blanket off me and stared in horror as I lay there turning purple. They removed the chain immediately and my mom went hysterical. My dad did not speak to me for days. It was the most horrible chain of events I have ever caused. Story 39. I went to another high school outside my district, and my good friend went to the one closest to where we lived. He had to go to a nighttime program that helped kids catch up on missing work or get tutoring before failing a class. There were 3 of us total, and we took a bag of paintballs along for the visit. When he got to the classroom, he immediately handed his work to someone who would do it for him while we waited. After he turned the completed work in, we walked around the school and went into random classrooms, pelting computer screens with paintballs. We also grabbed attendance books and threw all the student cards, which organized students by seat, row, and so on, all over the floor. We did this to a bunch of rooms and were making our escape through a back door until we came to a handicap ramp, which I hosed down with a fire extinguisher. The kicker is that it was all over the local news the next day, and the school stopped running the program, leaving many kids without the help they needed to pass their courses. I laid low about it after that. Story 40. My junior year in high school, some friends and I decided to go mailboxing. Since it was summer and around the 4th of July, I grabbed some firecrackers because I was always known as the fireworks guy, thanks to my dad buying wholesale and reselling stuff. We went to this one girl's house, someone we all made fun of, and I put this massive firecracker in her mailbox, easily equal to a quarter stick of dynamite. I set it off, jumped in the car, and her mailbox exploded into a billion pieces right as a second car turned the corner. The next day, different friends casually mentioned they saw her mailbox explode. She wasn't at school that day, and when she came back, she was covered in bandages and cuts from scars. It turns out she realized the mailbox being blown up was about her, started cutting herself because of it, cut too deep, and almost died. She's never been the same since. I can't describe the feeling I had when I found that out. Horrendous. Story 41. I absolutely destroyed 3 people's lives. I went to work in America for a year as a reformed substance addict. This got left out of visa forms at a halfway house in the Deep South, helping mostly meth addicts get back on track since it was the first place that accepted my application without too many questions, and I needed to leave my old life behind fast. Having dealt with similar problems myself, I thought it was something I needed to do to give back. While there, I met a girl who also worked at the house. She was deeply religious, extremely naive, and incredibly attractive. She had a boyfriend she'd been with since she was young, maybe 8, and they planned to marry in about a year. We became close, and she confided that they were already having S, even though that was a big no-no for them. With my charm and a fair amount of guilting, we started fooling around. She was so naive that I look back now and feel like a predator. I wish I could say that was the worst thing I did, but it wasn't. One day she told me she was pregnant and that it was most likely mine since she'd slept with me more than with her boyfriend. She said we could never see each other again. God knows how she planned to explain the pregnancy anyway. I regressed badly, bought a load of coke, and binged for days. My mind warped. Soon she became the love of my life in my head, and there was no way I'd let some high school kid take her and my child away. I mocked up fake newspaper-style posters and put them outside shops in town, then started Facebook campaigns claiming he was a pedophile. Anywhere else it would have been dismissed as a malicious lie, but this was a tiny Bible Belt town, and the hive mind formed instantly. Someone stabbed him. He survived, thank God, with only a small scar. But I didn't stop. I copied a video I secretly made of us having extremely explicit S onto hundreds of DVDs and put them into mailboxes, especially her family's, then left piles around town. Afterward, I got on the first plane home. As far as I know, I'm not wanted for any crime, probably because it was a small town and easier for everyone to bury it to spare her family more shame. But I kept checking Facebook and saw that her family disowned her, and she and her boyfriend fled town. He probably wanted nothing to do with her afterward anyway. Story 42. I got pretty excited when I read the post title because I never really post on Reddit since I can't relate to some of the stuff posted. In addition to not being clever enough to think up quirky punchlines. I was in the 3rd grade and it was during recess that I was playing Foursquare. 3 guys were ganging up on me because they wanted their friend to come in and join and play with them. I ended up finally losing, put up a good fight though, and went to a different kid. He was an Indian kid playing by himself, so I asked to play 1-on-1 two-square with him, if that even makes sense. He ended up beating me several times and started making fun of me, throwing mean comments and calling me things my little adolescent self didn't like. Temper built within myself, and I said something along the lines of, "Shut up, you applehead." After he wouldn't stop, I ended up running to him and took hold of his turban and yanked as hard as I could. The turban came off and a whole ton of hair fell down to his knees. I ran to the bathroom and then threw it in a urinal. Later that year, after I got in a ton of trouble, I apologized to the guy and befriended him. We were actually pretty good friends, and I started using him. He was an only child, and his parents weren't always home, so they compensated by giving him anything he wanted. PlayStation, N64, Sega Saturn, you name it, he had it. Eventually, he showed me his card collection. I ended up befriending him only to use him for his systems, and eventually stole 4 of his rare cards out of the 6 he had and stopped talking to him after that. Man, I was a scumbag in 4th grade. Story 43. When I was in middle school and my brother was in elementary school, he acted very, very feminine. At this time, I was a little depressed and unhappy with myself, and one way that would make me feel better was if I were to bully someone. The problem is I was never mean to anyone in my school because I always saw kids get picked on and never wanted to be part of it. Ironically, when I would go home, I would pick on my brother, call him names, tell him things like, "When you get into high school, you're going to have a rough time. People are going to give you a hard time." I was partially ashamed that my brother acted like that, and I was just being unfair to him because I had my own issues. All while this happened, my parents would punish me by grounding me or yelling at me, which would make me more upset, and instead of facing the punishment that I was in, I would just blame my brother for it. This would happen almost every day for about 2 years. Fast forward to now, 5 years, and my brother has come out and has a boyfriend. I've changed a lot, and so has he. We get along quite well, actually. I'm a lot more than open and accepting towards him. I've never talked to him or directly apologized to him about how I acted, though. There aren't many days that go by where I don't feel horrible about it. If I were him, I wouldn't even talk to me. Story 44. When I was 6 or so, my little brother was 3. We were super close and would play hide and seek in the house. Usually, his go-to spot was hiding in the coat closet. Being the careless kid I was, instead of finding him, I would slam and hold the closet door shut so he couldn't get out. He was really scared of the dark and would pound on the door crying. I saw this move in a movie or TV show and thought it would be funny. After a few minutes of him crying, I would let him out. Fast forward 16 years. My brother and his friends threw a party at my parents' house for his birthday. I bought the alcohol, and his friends smoked with me. My brother went inside, and I stayed out with some of his best friends who were still smoking. Small talk started, everything was calm, and then something happened that I will never forget. One of the kids looked me dead in the eye and said, "Elemento Pay, we can't believe you used to lock your brother in the closet when he was little. That is so messed up." The others nodded in agreement. Apparently, my brother had a drunken breakdown a couple of weeks earlier and told them all about how I used to do that, and it completely traumatized him. I started crying, ran inside, and hugged my brother while apologizing repeatedly, knocking over his game of beer pong in the process. I am no longer allowed to smoke with his friends. Story 45. When I was probably about 11 or 12, I went on a trip to Washington, D.C. with my Boy Scout troop. In the hotel we were staying in, there was a shower with one of those extendable hand shower hose things, and being young and naive, I discovered by chance that it felt pretty good when I sprayed water up my backside. Much to my dismay, I soon found out that if you spray water up your backside for a while, you will evacuate your bowels forcefully. After dropping the biggest mess of my life on the shower floor, I was petrified, so I left it there, ran back to my room, and pretended to not know. When people found out, the poor janitor was forced to clean it up, and all of us Boy Scouts tried to figure out who had done it. I convinced everyone it was the mentally challenged kid in our troop while he was standing right there, and he denied it, but we all accused him, and he started crying. At the time, I felt proud because I had gotten away with it, but now I realize how horrible I was.